My name is James Jimmy Harlow. Back then, I was a corporal in the 1st Cavalry Division, Airmobile, during the Vietnam War in 1968. I had just turned 20 when I shipped out. Looking back, I was just a kid, really. I didn't know much about the world except what I saw in movies or read in books. But the moment I stepped off that plane in Vietnam, I knew life was never going to be the same. Our unit was stationed near Pleiku in the Central Highlands. The base camp wasn't much, some barracks, a mess hall, and a few defensive perimeters. Jungle as far as the eye could see. It felt like the greens swallowed everything, even sound. At night, the silence was so loud it made you crazy, but when it wasn't quiet, it was worse. The enemy knew the land better than we did. We'd hear them sometimes, just out of sight, branches snapping, whispered Vietnamese we couldn't understand. They were ghosts, and we were the trespassers. I remember this one mission like it happened yesterday. It was late February, right after the Tet Offensive had caught everyone off guard. Morale was low, and no one trusted the higher-ups anymore. Intel had gotten a lot of guys killed recently, so when we were told to secure a supposedly abandoned village about 10 clicks from camp, nobody was too thrilled. Our squad was part of the lead element, 8 guys. There was Sergeant O'Malley, our squad leader, tough as nails but fair. Then there was Doc Taylor, our medic, always with a cigarette dangling from his lips even when he was patching someone up. Private Rodriguez, who couldn't shut up but had the best aim in the platoon. And then there was me, lugging an M16 and trying not to think about all the ways I could die out there. We set out at dawn. The sun was just creeping over the hills, and the fog hung low over the jungle, thick as soup. Visibility was crap, and every step felt like it could be your last. We moved in single file, rifles up, watching for tripwires or anything that didn't look right. The jungle smelled like damp earth and rotting plants. The insects were relentless, buzzing in your ears and biting through your fatigues. About 3 hours in, O'Malley called a halt. The village was just ahead, hidden in a clearing surrounded by trees. From where we stood, it looked deserted, no movement, no sound. Just a few thatch huts and some empty rice paddies. But we'd been burned before, and nobody was taking chances. "Stay sharp," O'Malley whispered, waving us forward. We fanned out, moving slow and careful. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The whole place felt off. Too quiet. No birds, no dogs, nothing. It was like the jungle was holding its breath. Rodriguez was the first to notice it, a faint trail in the dirt leading into one of the huts. It looked like something heavy had been dragged. "Could be a body," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. O'Malley nodded and signaled for Doc to check it out. The rest of us covered him, our rifles trained on the hut as he pushed the bamboo door open. What Doc found still haunts me to this day. Inside the hut was a young Vietnamese woman, maybe 18 or 19, tied up and barely conscious. She was covered in bruises, and there was a makeshift gag in her mouth. Next to her, there was a crate of AK-47s and a few grenades. "She's alive," Doc hissed, already moving to cut her loose. That's when all hell broke loose. A burst of gunfire erupted from the tree line, and bullets tore through the village. We hit the ground, scrambling for cover. The Viet Cong had been waiting for us, and now we were caught in an ambush. I remember Rodriguez screaming, "Claymores! They've got claymores!" just as an explosion ripped through the air, sending shrapnel flying. O'Malley was shouting orders, trying to keep us together, but it was chaos. The woman in the hut started screaming, and Doc was trying to shield her with his body while returning fire with his pistol. I crawled over to help, dragging my M16 through the mud. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of cordite. Somehow, we managed to pull her out and fall back to the tree line. We regrouped behind a cluster of boulders, breathing hard and checking for injuries. "What the hell just happened?" Rodriguez panted, his face pale. "They baited us," O'Malley said grimly, reloading his rifle. This was a damn setup. The woman was crying softly, her hands trembling as Doc tried to calm her down. She didn't speak English, but we didn't need words to understand the terror in her eyes. That's when we realized we had bigger problems. The Viet Cong weren't just trying to ambush us, they were trying to pin us down. And it was working. We were pinned down behind those boulders, and the Viet Cong weren't letting up. They had the high ground in the jungle and a clear line of sight into the village. Bullets kicked up dirt and splinters around us, the sound of gunfire echoing through the clearing like a drumbeat. "Rodriguez! Can you see them?" O'Malley barked, squinting through the dense foliage. Rodriguez had the sharpest eyes in the squad, but even he was having trouble. The Viet Cong were masters of camouflage, blending into the jungle, so well they might as well have been part of it. "I got movement at 10 o'clock," Rodriguez shouted, squeezing off a few rounds. "But I can't tell how many." I felt sweat pouring down my face, mixing with the grime on my skin. My hands were shaking as I reloaded my M16, but I forced myself to focus. We'd been through firefights before, but this one was different. The Viet Cong weren't just attacking, they were coordinating. This was a trap, and we'd walked right into it. The woman we'd rescued was huddled behind one of the boulders, clutching her knees and rocking back and forth. Doc was next to her, trying to keep her calm while keeping an eye on the rest of us. "O'Malley, we need a plan," Doc shouted over the gunfire. O'Malley didn't answer right away. He was scanning the jungle, his jaw tight, trying to assess the situation. Finally, he turned to me and Rodriguez. "Jimmy, Rodriguez, flank left. Try to draw their fire and figure out where they're dug in. Taylor, you stay here with the girl and cover us. The rest of you on me. We're going to push up the center and break through this ambush." It was a gutsy plan, and we all knew it. Splitting up in a situation like this was risky as hell, but we didn't have much choice. The longer we stayed pinned down, the more likely reinforcements would show up, and not the kind we wanted. Rodriguez and I moved out first, crawling through the tall grass on our stomachs. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Every time a bullet zipped past, I flinched, expecting the next one to hit home. We made it to a cluster of bushes and stopped to catch our breath. From here, we had a slightly better view of the tree line. Rodriguez raised his rifle and peered through the scope, scanning the area. "There," he whispered, pointing to a shadowy figure crouched behind a fallen log. "I count at least 3, maybe 4. I nodded and steadied my aim, lining up the sights of my M16. My hands were still shaking, but I took a deep breath and squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against my shoulder, and one of the shadows dropped. That's when they spotted us. A burst of gunfire tore through the bushes, and Rodriguez and I dove for cover. Leaves and branches exploded around us, and I felt something hot graze my arm. I looked down and saw a thin red line. Just a scratch, but it was enough to remind me how close I'd come. "Jimmy, you good?" Rodriguez called out, glancing over at me. "Yeah," I said, though my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. We returned fire, trying to keep the Viet Cong off balance. I could hear O'Malley and the others advancing up the center, their rifles barking as they moved. The air was filled with the deafening crack of gunfire and the acrid smell of gunpowder. But the Viet Cong weren't backing down. If anything, they were pressing harder. For everyone we took out, it seemed like 2 more popped up to take their place. And then came the mortars. The first shell hit about 20 feet from us, throwing up a geyser of dirt and smoke. The shockwave slammed into me like a freight train, and I hit the ground hard, my ears ringing. "Mortars! They've got mortars!" Rodriguez shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. We scrambled to our feet and ran, zigzagging through the jungle to avoid the incoming shells. I didn't know where we were going, just away from the explosions. Every step felt like it might be my last. We regrouped with O'Malley and the others near a small stream. Everyone looked worse for wear, mud-covered, bloodied, and wide-eyed. The woman we'd rescued was still with us, clinging to Doc like he was her lifeline. "This isn't working," O'Malley said, his voice grim. "They've got us outnumbered and outgunned. We need to call in air support." "Good luck with that," Doc muttered. The radios fried. Took a hit during the ambush. That was when the realization hit me. We were on our own. No reinforcements, no air cover. Just 8 guys and an innocent civilian against what felt like an army. "We could fall back," I suggested, though I knew how it would sound. "No," O'Malley said firmly. "If we retreat, they'll overrun us before we get half a mile. We hold the line here." It wasn't what any of us wanted to hear, but O'Malley was right. If we didn't make a stand, none of us were getting out alive. We dug in along the stream, using the natural cover as best we could. I could see the determination in everyone's eyes, even as exhaustion set in. This was it, our last stand. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the Viet Cong launched another assault. They came in waves, firing from all sides, trying to overwhelm us. I lost track of how many times I reloaded, my fingers fumbling with the magazines as my rifle grew hot to the touch. Then, just when it seemed like we couldn't hold out any longer, something unexpected happened. The woman we'd rescued, who had been silent up until now, suddenly pointed toward the jungle and shouted something in Vietnamese. At first, none of us understood, but then Doc's face lit up. "She's saying there's a cave nearby," he yelled. "A safe place to hide." It was a gamble, but we didn't have much choice. O'Malley gave the order, and we grabbed what gear we could carry and followed her lead. The woman led us through the jungle, like she'd been born in it. For someone who'd looked so fragile just a few hours earlier, she moved with a kind of quiet confidence, dodging roots and slipping through the underbrush without a sound. The rest of us stumbled after her, weighed down by gear and exhaustion. The gunfire was still behind us, distant but closing in. The Viet Cong weren't giving up that easily. They were hunters, and we were bleeding prey. Every crack of a branch or rustle of leaves felt like a gunshot, and I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see a dozen of them charging out of the jungle. O'Malley kept us moving, his voice low but urgent. "Stay close. No one strays, got it? If we get separated, we're dead." I stuck close to Rodriguez, who was limping from a shrapnel wound in his calf. He was trying to play it cool, cracking jokes under his breath, but I could see the pain etched on his face. Doc had done what he could with a bandage and some morphine, but we all knew Rodriguez needed a real medic, and fast. "Jimmy," he whispered, leaning on me as we walked. "Next time we go on one of these little strolls, remind me to break my damn leg first." "Shut up and keep moving," I whispered back, though I couldn't help but smile a little. The woman finally stopped at the base of a rocky hill covered in vines. She pointed to a narrow opening, barely big enough for a person to squeeze through. It looked like nothing, just a dark hole in the earth. But the way she gestured told us everything we needed to know. "This is it?" O'Malley asked, his voice skeptical. She nodded, her eyes wide and pleading. "In tone," she said, her voice trembling. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but I could tell she was desperate for us to trust her. "In tone," Doc repeated, nodding like he understood. "Safe. She's saying it's safe." O'Malley didn't look convinced, but we didn't have time to argue. The gunfire was getting louder, and the jungle seemed to close in around us like it was pushing us toward the cave. "All right," he said finally. "We go in? Single file. Stay alert." Rodriguez went first, followed by Doc and the woman. I was next, and O'Malley brought up the rear. The cave was even narrower than it looked, the walls rough and jagged. The air inside was cool and damp, and it smelled like wet stone and decay. We crawled deeper, the light fading until it was almost pitch black. I could hear Rodriguez muttering curses up ahead, his voice bouncing off the walls. "If there's spiders in here, I swear to God." After what felt like forever, the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. It wasn't much, just a hollowed-out space with enough room for all of us to sit without touching the walls. But it was dry, and for the first time all day, I felt like we could catch our breath. O'Malley lit a small flashlight, keeping the beam low to avoid giving away our position. He scanned the chamber, checking for anything that might be hiding in the shadows. Satisfied, he turned to the rest of us. "Okay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We hold here until it's safe to move. No noise, no light, and no one goes anywhere without my say-so. Got it?" We nodded, too tired to argue. Doc sat down next to the woman, who was leaning against the wall with her knees pulled to her chest. She looked exhausted, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Doc offered her a canteen, and she drank greedily, her hands shaking. Rodriguez leaned back against the wall, wincing as he adjusted his leg. "This is cozy," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Anybody bring marshmallows?" "Shut up, Rodriguez," O'Malley muttered, but there was no bite to it. I sat down next to Rodriguez and closed my eyes, trying to block out the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My hands were still trembling, and I couldn't stop replaying the ambush in my head. Every time I thought about the bullets flying past, the mortars exploding, or the way the Viet Cong had moved like shadows through the jungle, my chest tightened. Time passed slowly in the cave. I don't know how long we sat there, listening to the muffled sounds of the jungle and the occasional distant gunfire. My mind started to wander, thinking about home, about my mom, who'd cried when I left, and my little sister, who'd begged me to bring her back a souvenir. I wondered if I'd ever see them again. Then I heard it, a faint noise, barely audible over the sound of my own breathing. At first I thought I was imagining it, but then I saw O'Malley stiffen, his head snapping toward the entrance. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, crunching softly on the loose gravel outside the cave. My heart stopped, and I gripped my rifle so tightly my knuckles turned white. O'Malley motioned for us to stay quiet, his finger to his lips. He turned off the flashlight, plunging the chamber into darkness. The footsteps grew louder, closer. My pulse was racing, and I could feel the sweat dripping down my back. Whoever it was, they were right outside. Then they stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. I held my breath, straining to hear anything at all. The tension was unbearable. And then came the voice. It was low and guttural, speaking in Vietnamese. I didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a command. My blood ran cold. We sat there, frozen in the dark, as the voice outside the cave echoed into the stillness. It wasn't loud, but the weight of it was enough to send shivers down my spine. Whoever was out there wasn't alone. There were more of them. You could tell by the way the voice stopped, and others murmured in response. I could feel Rodriguez tense up next to me, his breathing shallow. O'Malley motioned for all of us to stay completely silent, his hand gripping his M16 like a vice. The woman we'd rescued was trembling, her small frame pressed against Doc's side as he wrapped an arm around her protectively. The footsteps started again, slow and deliberate. They didn't head straight into the cave. Instead, they seemed to circle the entrance, as if whoever was out there was trying to decide whether to go in. My palms were slick with sweat, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest so hard I thought it might give us away. O'Malley leaned close to my ear and whispered, so softly I could barely hear him. Safety off, but no one fires unless I say so. I nodded, even though he probably couldn't see me in the dark. My finger slid onto the trigger of my M16, and I adjusted my grip, trying not to make a sound. The silence stretched on, broken only by the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional crunch of gravel underfoot. Whoever was out there knew we were close. They were moving slowly, cautiously. This wasn't some green recruit fumbling around in the jungle. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Then it happened. A sharp clink echoed from the cave's entrance, a metallic sound that was unmistakable. Grenade! Before I even had time to process what was happening, O'Malley was already moving. He lunged toward the entrance, grabbing the grenade and hurling it back outside in one smooth motion. Down! He bellowed, throwing himself flat against the cave floor. The explosion rocked the jungle, the flash of light momentarily illuminating the cave and the faces of the men around me. Dirt and debris rained down, and the shockwave left my ears ringing. But O'Malley's quick thinking had saved us. The grenade had detonated far enough away that none of us were seriously hurt, though my head was spinning, and my vision blurred for a moment. Move! Move now! O'Malley barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. We scrambled to our feet, grabbing what gear we could. The woman was crying, her voice muffled against Doc's chest as he carried her. Rodriguez was limping badly, but he waved me off when I tried to help him. No time, Jimmy. Just go. The cave's exit was too exposed now. O'Malley led us deeper into the tunnel, trusting the woman's earlier gestures that this wasn't just a dead end. The sound of shouting and footsteps outside grew louder, angry, determined voices calling out commands in Vietnamese. We moved as quickly as we could, the narrow walls of the tunnel scraping against our shoulders and gear. The darkness was absolute, and the only sounds were our labored breathing and the crunch of boots on gravel. The tunnel twisted and turned, and every corner felt like it might lead to a dead end, or worse, another ambush. But then, just as my legs were about to give out, we emerged into another chamber, larger this time, with a faint glimmer of light filtering down from above. O'Malley stopped and scanned the area, his rifle raised. "Clear," he said after a moment, though his voice was tight with tension. Doc set the woman down gently, checking her over to make sure she hadn't been hurt in the chaos. Rodriguez collapsed against the wall, his head tilted back and his eyes closed. "Jesus," he muttered. "They're not letting up? Are they?" "No," O'Malley said, pacing the chamber. "They want us dead, and they're not stopping until they get it." I leaned against the wall, trying to catch my breath. My hands were still shaking, and my ears were ringing from the grenade. It felt like we'd been running for hours, but I knew the Viet Cong were probably regrouping even now. "We can't stay here," I said, my voice hoarse. "No kidding," Rodriguez shot back, though there was no real venom in his words. He was just scared. We all were. The woman suddenly spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. She pointed toward the far end of the chamber, where another tunnel led deeper into the hill. Her words were quick and urgent, and though I couldn't understand her, the meaning was clear. "She's saying it leads to the river," Doc translated. "A way out." O'Malley nodded, his jaw tight. "Good. Let's move." We didn't argue. There wasn't time. The next tunnel was even narrower than the first, and the air grew colder as we descended. The light from above faded, leaving us in near-total darkness. O'Malley's flashlight was our only guide, and he kept it angled low to avoid attracting attention. We moved in single file, every sound amplified by the confined space. My mind was racing, replaying the ambush and the grenade over and over. The Viet Cong were relentless, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into another trap. Then I heard a faint rhythmic sound in the distance. At first I thought it was my imagination, but as we moved closer, it grew louder. Water. The tunnel opened up onto a rocky ledge overlooking a river. The current was strong, rushing through the narrow gorge like it couldn't wait to escape the jungle. The sight of it filled me with a strange mix of hope and dread. "Looks like we found our way out," Rodriguez said, though his voice was laced with doubt. "Yeah," O'Malley said. "Now we just have to survive it." We stood on the rocky ledge, staring down at the river. The water churned violently, white foam swirling around jagged rocks that jutted out like teeth. It wasn't a calm escape route. It was a gauntlet. "This is our way out," Rodriguez said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You gotta be kidding me." O'Malley crouched near the edge, peering down into the rushing current. He was silent for a moment, his face unreadable. Then he stood and turned to us. "It's this, or we wait for the Viet Cong to catch up. Take your pick." Rodriguez groaned, shaking his head. "I swear, man, this war's gonna kill me before the war even kills me." Doc, still holding on to the woman, spoke up. "She's been right so far. If she says this is the way out, we need to trust her." "Ich glänzte her." She was sitting on the ground, her knees hugged to her chest, her wide eyes flicking nervously between us and the tunnel we'd just come through. Whatever courage she'd shown before seemed to be waning. She was scared, and so was I. O'Malley didn't waste any more time debating. He pulled off his gear, keeping only his rifle and the essentials, and gestured for us to do the same. "Strip down to what you can carry. Anything that's not waterproof, leave it. This current will drag us under if we're too heavy." The idea of leaving gear behind made my stomach twist, but he was right. I followed his lead, ditching my pack and ammunition I knew wouldn't make it through the water. My rifle and a few grenades were all I kept. Rodriguez grumbled as he struggled out of his gear, his movements slow and awkward. His leg was worse than he was letting on, and we all knew it. "You sure you can do this?" I asked, kneeling next to him. He gave me a crooked grin. "I didn't come all this way to drown in some jungle river, Jimmy. I'll make it." O'Malley went first. He stepped off the ledge without hesitation, his body disappearing into the raging water below. A second later, his head popped up, and he waved for us to follow. "Let's go." Doc helped the woman to her feet, speaking to her softly. She nodded, her face pale but determined. Together, they jumped, vanishing into the current. Rodriguez looked at me, his expression a mix of fear and resignation. "Guess it's my turn." I helped him to the edge, and with a deep breath, he launched himself into the river. Now it was just me. The sound of the water roared in my ears as I stood on the ledge, my heart pounding. Behind me, the distant echo of voices, Viet Song, closing in. I didn't have a choice. I jumped. The water hit me like a freight train, cold and unrelenting. It yanked me under immediately, twisting and spinning me until I didn't know which way was up. My lungs burned as I fought to surface, kicking and clawing against the current. When I finally broke through, gasping for air, I spotted O'Malley a few yards ahead. He was clinging to a rock, shouting something I couldn't hear over the rush of the river. The next few minutes were a blur of chaos. The current carried me through narrow passages, my body slamming into rocks and debris. Every time I went under, I felt like I might not come back up. But somehow, I managed to stay afloat, my hands gripping anything I could reach. Finally, the river widened and the current began to slow. I saw O'Malley waving from the shore, his figure a blur through the mist and spray. One by one, we pulled ourselves out of the water, coughing and sputtering. Rodriguez was the last to make it, dragging himself onto the bank with my help. He collapsed on his back, laughing weakly. "Hell of a ride," he said, his chest heaving. The woman was sitting nearby, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as Doc checked her for injuries. She seemed shaken, but unhurt. O'Malley stood at the edge of the river, scanning the jungle with his rifle at the ready. "We're not out of this yet," he said. He was right. We were still deep in enemy territory, and the sound of the Viet Song wasn't far behind. The river had bought us some time, but they wouldn't stop hunting us. "We need to keep moving," O'Malley said. He turned to the woman. "River lead to village?" She nodded quickly, pointing down a narrow path that ran alongside the water. We started walking, every step feeling like a marathon. The jungle was quieter now, the sounds of the river fading behind us. But the tension hadn't gone away. Every shadow felt like an enemy, every rustle of leaves like the click of a rifle being cocked. It wasn't long before we heard it again, the low hum of voices in the distance. The Viet Song were following the river, just as we had. "We're running out of time," O'Malley said, his voice grim. The woman suddenly stopped, her eyes wide. She pointed toward a dense thicket of trees off the path, speaking quickly in Vietnamese. "What's she saying?" I asked. Doc frowned. "I think she's saying there's a safe place nearby. A hideout." O'Malley hesitated. The idea of leaving the path didn't sit well with him, but we didn't have many options. "All right," he said. "Show us." She led us into the thicket, her movements quick and purposeful. After a few minutes, we came to a clearing where a large tree had fallen, its massive roots creating a natural shelter. "This'll have to do," O'Malley said. "We dig in here, quiet and low." We spread out, setting up a defensive position around the clearing. The woman huddled close to Doc, her hands trembling. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. The jungle was eerily silent, the kind of silence that only comes before something terrible. Then we heard it, a single snap of a branch, followed by the faint murmur of voices. They were close. O'Malley raised his hand, signaling for silence. My grip tightened on my rifle, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows shifted, and I saw movement. Figures emerging from the trees, their rifles at the ready. The Viet Song had found us. The Viet Song moved cautiously, their dark silhouettes blending with the dense jungle. There were 5 of them that I could see, but I knew there were more out there just beyond the trees. My finger hovered over the trigger, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for O'Malley's signal. The woman beside Doc whimpered softly, and he quickly hushed her, pressing a hand gently to her shoulder. The slightest sound could give us away, but she was terrified. Hell, so was I. O'Malley held up 3 fingers. He dropped one, then another. When the last finger fell, chaos erupted. Our rifles barked in unison, the muzzle flashes lighting up the jungle like lightning. The Viet Cong scattered, diving for cover as bullets tore through the underbrush. I fired until my rifle clicked empty, the noise deafening in the confined space. Reloading, I shouted, fumbling for a fresh magazine. O'Malley was already on the move, his M16 blazing as he shifted position. Rodriguez, injured as he was, managed to keep up a steady stream of fire, his curses punctuating each shot. The Viet Cong fired back, their rounds snapping past us and slamming into the fallen tree. One of their grenades went off too close, the shockwave knocking me flat on my back. My ears rang as I scrambled to my feet, the world spinning around me. O'Malley was yelling something, but I couldn't make it out. The woman was screaming, Doc shielding her with his body as bullets chewed through the ground around them. I spotted a Viet Cong fighter darting toward our position, his AK-47 raised. Without thinking, I pulled the pin on a grenade and lobbed it in his direction. The explosion sent him flying, his rifle skidding across the ground. "Keep pushing," O'Malley shouted, his voice finally breaking through the ringing in my ears. We held them off as best we could, but it was clear we were outnumbered. For everyone we took down, 2 more seemed to take their place. Then, just as I was about to think it was over, I heard it, the distant roar of helicopter blades. "Choppers!" Rodriguez shouted, his face lighting up with hope. I didn't dare look away from the fight, but the sound grew louder, the thrum of the rotors shaking the air around us. A moment later, I saw them. Tooch, one Huey swooping in low over the jungle. "Smoke out!" O'Malley yelled, tossing a green smoke grenade into the clearing. The thick cloud billowed up, marking our position for the pilots. The first Huey hovered above us, its door gunner unleashing a torrent of fire on the Viet Cong. The enemy scattered, retreating into the jungle as the second chopper came in for a landing. "Move! Go, go, go!" O'Malley shouted, waving us toward the Huey. We didn't need to be told twice. Rodriguez and I helped the woman onto the chopper, followed by Doc and O'Malley. I climbed in last, my legs shaking as the bird lifted off, the jungle falling away beneath us. As we flew back toward base, the adrenaline started to wear off, leaving me drained. The woman sat between Doc and me, her hands gripping mine tightly. She didn't say a word, but the look in her eyes said everything. We'd made it. O'Malley leaned back against the side of the chopper, his face grim but relieved. "Hell of a day," he muttered, lighting a cigarette with shaky hands. I nodded, staring out at the endless expanse of jungle below. The war wasn't over. Not for us, and not for the people we'd left behind. But in that moment, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the Huey carried us to safety, I let myself feel something I hadn't in a long time. Hope.